The broader theoretical framework that I've brought to the migration side of our research has to do with this disagreement over what drives interethnic relations and how people react to outgroups when they come into contact with them. This is an area that I've, for many years, worked in American politics, and it's from working with race in the United States and to a lesser extent migration and immigration in the United States that I developed interest in these theories that Ridvan and I are only now trying to apply to migration topics. In at least the U.S. context, the sort of rational competition theory that Gary had introduced to you has been called various things. The group threat hypothesis is the more general name, and therefore the one I would feel most comfortable applying to a new context. And it's associated in its origins in the United States with V.O. Key Jr., who studied the U.S. South, followed by Michael Giles of Emory University, who also developed it primarily in the U.S. South. It was, in the hands of Michael Giles, very much a materialist hypothesis. The idea was there were material things of value, you fought over them, and therefore when two groups in larger numbers came together, conflict got worse. I could add here a sociologist, Blaylock, who was also part of that literature. It was a materialist idea. And it boiled down to a fairly simple expectation, which is as groups came into proximity, you got more hostility. And really it was that correlation that people were looking for that drove the literature, much less so than the ideas that underlay where those expectations originated. Our names are more similar for what is often portrayed as the rival idea, the contact hypothesis. This idea is, as you saw previously, associated with Gordon Allport. I responded in my earlier research specifically to some work in the American context by Thomas Carsey, and I often find myself cited as one of these people, in my opinion, in error. So that's why it says me, but with the expression of alarm. I'm convinced that one person made that mistake, and everybody else has been stealing their citation and without actually reading the work ever since, which is how these things tend to happen. This is in the U.S., and let me stress, this is in the U.S. context, a psychological model, not a material model. And Duncan, if you're thinking, why is he saying that? It's because I'm going to talk back about your work in a second. There's a good point, I think, to make here. Psychological, in a sense, what happens? I come into contact with the outgroup, I realize, oh, gee, they're not all that bad. I had some stereotypes about them. I realize maybe they're not quite true. They don't have three heads. Now that I know this, I'm less racist, I'm less intolerant, and my ignorance is gone, and I don't mind the group so much. And under this expectation, the more I find myself in proximity with the group, I would get the regional pattern that you saw in your maps, right? I would expect more tolerance in the places where people actually came into contact with the group in question. There are historical cases that fit both of these very well empirically. The U.S. South fit very well with the group threat hypothesis. In places where there are more African Americans, the backlash against integration was most severe, clearly, most severe. Examples that would seem to fit the contact hypothesis. If you look at patterns of anti-Semitism in France, leading up to the World War II period, what you find is the people who lived in areas with Jews, they tended not to be the ones supporting the anti-Semitic candidates, anti-Semites. You went out into the places where people may have never met someone of Jewish ethnicity, and that's where the greatest intolerance. So we know that there are historical examples where either of these patterns of proximity do appear, and now we need to start refining the theory. Now, I have rebelled against this, and in a sense, therefore, criticized the previous talk. I have rebelled against this duality, because it's conflating a mechanism and a prediction. All right, the mechanism, material versus psychological. The prediction, you get proximity, the sign goes one way versus the other. And the reason has to do with what Duncan told you. You often see it in the literature when applied comparatively rather than in the United States, which is there's this possibility of cultural threat, right? There can be stakes. They can be at risk. You can be fighting over them. It's not mere perception, but it's not money. It's not salaries or work. Now, I've tried a couple of names for this idea that I've pushed most recently in a book chapter coming out not too long from now with Routledge. David Leal is the editor I work with, but he's not the lead author of it. I called it at one time earlier in my work, in my dissertation, which was way back in 2000, before you guys probably even got to college. I tried calling it an assimilation hypothesis. The idea was that when you're, for an extended period of time, in contact with a group, your interests can converge. Groups can become more like each other and start to share interests. Over time, I decided that was a little bit of a simplification, so I gravitated to a better, I think, label for it, which is the shared interest hypothesis. There are times when proximity doesn't make you less stupid, doesn't sort of solve you of this psychological disease. What it does is it causes your interest to converge. So this will not apply in the European case, but I'll give you an example. If you've got neighborhoods in a U.S. city that have a large African-American population and other neighborhoods that have none, and someone proposes a program to help minority economic advancement so that they have more spending money to spend in stores and to drive down crime or other such things, who gains among the in-group, the whites? Who gains from that money being distributed? The one whose stores they'll patronize, the ones who, as the money floods in, they also benefit from the multiplier effect. So you can have a shared interest.